Hello, everyone. My name is Kane Peterson from NewTek, and today we're going to go through some information about new products that we introduced at NAB and updates. So I want to kind of take you through these. It's going to start with a PowerPoint going through the new products and capabilities. Then I'll go through and demonstrate some of this stuff so you have a better idea how to use it and take advantage of it. And then we will finish up today with some discussion about 4K UHD workflows and our products, and kind of show you how that all fits in. So again, if there's questions as the presentation goes on, please feel free to type them into the chat room. They should get answered in there, and hopefully they'll otherwise all be answered during the presentation. But let's get started. So we're going to begin with talking about new products here, and the first one we're going to talk about is TriCaster TC1. So TC1 is a brand new TriCaster model that has just been introduced at NAB. It is a system that is capable of handling all the way up to 4K UHD formats, and we'll talk about more about that in the 4K part of this presentation. But just to go over some highlight features of this product, some new, some existing, but just to kind of what sets this apart. TriCaster TC1 is capable of all of the following video formats, including 4K UHD at up to 60 frames per second, 3G SDI formats, which include 1080p 50 and 1080p 60. High definition and standard definition formats as well. And just like you would be used to with previous model TriCasters, you are allowed to mix and match all of those formats as long as they're similar frame rates together. So you could put 4K UHD with 1080p 60, let's say, with HD all into the same system and work with it together. The system is also capable of outputting either a single UHD output, or you can also run it if you're running in a non-UHD format, so any 3G or lower format. You'll have four completely independent outputs that you'd be able to configure. So you could set these up for different video feeds, or 3 of those outputs do have down and cross converters on them, so you could also use them to output lower resolution formats as well. The system comes with 16 external inputs, all of which can be NDI. So you are allowed to take any NDI equipment and plug that in. Now, the system also does come with 4 3G SDI inputs, and you can make any of those 16 inputs also be SDI just by using the ones in the back of the unit, and you're allowed to kind of mix and match that as necessary. And you can also use other converter products like our Connect boxes to hook up more SDI equipment should your needs go higher than the 4 SDIs that are included. It also has 4 MEs on the system. These MEs all include up to 4 layers and 4 keyers with re-entry capability, so they're very powerful MEs included into the standard unit. Native IP processing. So what this really means is that the system really it's an IP first system. It takes an IP, and that's how it natively works. And in fact, if you need to bring in non-IP formats like SDI, we convert SDI formats into IP and bring it in. So we're really leveraging all of the power and capability of IP-based production, which is the way that things are going and the way that systems are moving in here. Just to put that in perspective, basically any other system out there that is advertising, IP connectivity to it is really doing that the other way around. They're taking IP formats and converting them into baseband SDI formats for that last section of the transport that they then bring into their switcher. So they're losing all the IP native aspect of it, the ability to send commands or have that two-way connection, or any of the other aspects that IP allows us to leverage, tally information and stuff. So really, this is a key feature that separates the TriCaster TC1 and IP series, for that matter, apart from other products out there, because we're IP all the way in, not IP up until the last couple of feet, and then change it back into SDI there. TC1 also comes with 2 channels of Skype TX integrated into the product. It is the only switcher available on the market that has Skype TX built in. So if you're familiar with our talk show product, then you'll be familiar with what Skype TX is and how it basically works. And I'm going to go through and show you how you set that up and how you use it, but that is integrated in as a standard feature. We also have 2 internal clip players, DDRs, that allow us to play back a variety of video formats, along with 4 channels of local recording on this unit. So that's all built in. Streaming or publishing allows us to push content out to a lot of other places. So we can stream to Facebook, to YouTube, Twitch, Ustream. We can also publish clips to Vimeo, LinkedIn, Twitter, so all sorts of destinations. And while it doesn't mention it in the slide, we also have a brand new dual channel streaming engine that are included in these products, so you can actually stream out 2 completely independent streams of video from your system to different destinations. Internal or NDI graphics. So the internal graphics would be the built-in title templates that come with the system, plus the ability to make your own title templates. All of that is in here and works if you've used previous TriCasters like you'd expect. But we'll also allow you to use any of the NDI solutions out there. So that could be live text, that could be our new VizRT NVG1 graphics system, that could be New Blue Effects, CharacterWorks, Chiron, 3D Storm titling systems. There's a bunch of solutions out there. So whatever CG solution fits your needs, there's one out there that you can add to the system. It includes a full virtual set capability that you're used to in TriCaster, with the included sets of virtual sets with multiple angles, and then you can get Virtual Set Editor to expand or allow you to customize and build your own sets. And finally, this system also does include 3 multi-viewers. So you get one system UI monitor along with 2 additional multi-viewers that are completely customizable and can be used on the system. So all of that kind of comprises the core functionality that you'd find in a TriCaster TC1. Now, the system itself is available in 2 different configurations. You can either get it in a 2-rack unit setup or a 3-rack unit setup. Now, the difference between these 2 units is the power supply. The 2-rack unit includes a single internal power supply, and the 3-rack unit includes a dual removable power supply. So based upon what your client's needs, if they need a dual power supply setup, we have a solution for that. If space is of utmost concern, so they want the least amount of rack spaces being used, we have a solution for that as well. Beyond that, these systems have exactly the same capabilities. So you're not losing or gaining anything beyond the power supply by going with one solution over the other. And just to kind of point out the features on the back here, we have 4 3G SDI inputs on the back, along with 4 3G SDI outputs. So those are labeled right here. We have a Genlock connector, the Tally connector, which works like the Tally connector does in previous TriCasters if you're used to hooking up to that. We have the analog I/O. I do want to make a point to just mention that the analog I/O on this unit is line level. It does not have phantom power. It does not take mic level input. So if you do need to hook up microphones, you are going to have to hook it through an audio mixer or some kind of power injector to adjust the levels and get the power to your mic in there and stuff, because these are line level. And then the rest of the connectors here are the computer connectors. And so looking at the graphics card, which is in the middle here, we have 3 different graphics card outputs. There's a DVI, an HDMI, and a display port. And so those 3 ports are what you would hook your local computer monitors to for your main UI and your 2 multi-view monitors. Now, a couple points I just want to make out on these ports. One is that the maximum supported resolution for any of these ports is 1920 by 1200. In fact, you need a minimum of 1920 by 1280 for the main UI. The multi-view monitors could run lower, but it would be highly recommended that you run at least 1920 by 1080. But anything higher than 1920 by 1200 is not supported. So if you get a 4K display and hooked it to one of these ports, it is not supported to be running it at that resolution. So just keep that in mind, that basically HD level displays are all you need to make this work. Also, no converters or adapters are included with the unit. So being that you have 3 different types of graphics card connectors, chances are you probably, if you're going to hook up 3 monitors, going to need at least to adapt one of these to something, because I'm not aware of monitors that have all 3 different types of connectors on it, although there could be. So again, a display port to HDMI or display port to DVI, or maybe a DVI to HDMI type converter adapters might be needed. Just make sure you include those with the solution you're putting together, so that you don't get on site and realize you can't connect the monitor that the client needs. And then over on the computer connection side, we've got a bunch of USB connectors, both USB 2 and USB 3. The USB 3 connectors all have blue on the inside of the USB connectors. We have 2 1 gigabit Ethernet connectors, so to hook up for bringing NDI sources or streaming out or any other network connectivity that you need. The sound card, which can be used by the Skype TX for the talkback. So in this case, the sound card could be of potential use, depending on how you set it up. And then there's also, on this little red area, is a eSATA port. By the way, when it comes to storage on these units, there is 2 3 terabyte internal hard drives. They are not removable, but that will allow you to record your 4 channels of video and give you storage for clip playback and stuff. And then there is an SSD boot drive, and that's what's used for booting up the system and holding the operating system and stuff. So if somebody does need to expand the amount of storage on this unit to have more space for recording or clip playback or something, you're going to use one of the expansion ports in the back, whether it be the eSATA connector, a USB 3 connector, or potentially connecting it to a NAS or a SAN over Ethernet to expand the amount of storage that you could have access to on the system. But there are no removable drive bays on the front of the unit where you can just pop a drive out that you might be used to. So there's plenty of storage internally, but anything beyond that will be connected to one of these back ports to expand it. All right, we also have 2 new control surfaces that are designed to pair with the TriCaster TC1. The first is the TC1 LP, or large panel, and the second is the TC1 SP, or small panel. Both of these are available, and by the way, the TriCaster TC1 is compatible with previous TriCaster control panels. So if somebody does have a 8000 CS, 860 CS, 460 CS, or even a mini CS, you could connect that up and use that as well. Although these panels certainly are a little more ideal because they are all properly labeled and everything for the TriCaster TC1 on existing older TriCaster panels. You're going to have to put tape on them to relabel anything that for a function that is, or button that has possibly changed its function on there. But I do want to take a moment here and explain some of the differences between these 2 panels, because I think being the TC1 is a very scalable system in the sense that you might have people who do very small productions on it to people who do very large productions on it. Pairing them with the proper control panel could be very important. Otherwise, they get the one they don't want, and they might be kind of frustrated that there's things that they were expecting to do that they're not going to be able to, or stuff. So here's some of the major differences between these 2 panels. So the first is the main source buttons that you can find on the 2. So on the small panel, you have 14 buttons available. This means that this panel will allow you to access the first 8 inputs, the 2 DDRs and 2 MEs, along with a buffer and the black video channel. So that is everything that is directly available via a single button press from this panel. That doesn't mean that you lose 8 inputs, that you can't access 9 through 16. You're just going to have to either access those using the UI of the TriCaster TC1 or build macros to trigger those additional channels that you might want. So certainly somebody who is going to be doing a larger production might find this panel not as ideal because they only have access to the first 8 cameras. Whereas with the TriCaster 1 large panel, the LP panel, that has 24 buttons, and that gives us access to all 16 inputs along with both DDRs, both graphics channels, and all 4 MEs. So from there, they pretty much have access to almost everything they would typically need access to. You could still, using the UI, access buffers and black if you need to get to those as well. They're certainly not as common to be needed off the main switcher bus, but they're there, and you could use macros as well to get to them. So Just keep that in mind. And I'll also point out that even on the small panel, if somebody does pick input 9, while there certainly could do that using a macro or a button on the control surface, there is going to be nothing lit up on the panel to tell them that they're on input 9. So if they really need that feedback as well, where they can just look at that control surface and know this is a channel of video I'm on, the large panel is going to be the more desirable panel for that. Downstream keyer layer control. On the small panel, you can access the first 2 downstream keyers, 1 and 2. But if somebody wants access to all 4 downstream keyers, the large panel gives you access to all 4 keyers. So just keep that in mind. That's another big difference between the two. The size of the panel in the sense of how many stripes it controls. The small panel is considered a 1.5 stripe panel, and the large panel is considered a 2 stripe panel. Now, what that kind of means, if you're not familiar, is that when you look at these panels, the T-bar and delegate control area here, like the take and auto buttons, on the small panel there's 1, and on the large panel you see there are 2 T-bars and delegate control areas in there. And so the big difference here is that on the large control panel, I can control 2 switches simultaneously. Maybe I'm going to do a main switch and a secondary switch, and since I have 2 completely independent control areas, I can do both of those at the same time. Whereas on the small panel, with this the 1 control area here, I can choose whether this controls the main switcher bus or an ME, but it has to be moved back and forth between the 2. So I don't really get that fully independent control that you'd find. It's kind of more like one or the other at this, depending on what I need. So again, depending upon their workflow, that may or may not affect them, but the large panel gives you the full 2-stripe control. Also, when you're controlling those MEs, you'll see that the number of buttons available as to how many sources you can select in the ME from the panel also varies as well. On the large panel, we get the full 24 set of buttons. So everything that you can select in the main switcher bus can also be selected inside an ME. But on a small panel, you'll see that in this case, there's only 11 buttons. That means there's even a fewer amount of buttons that can be selected inside the ME. So again, somebody doing a larger production and they're going to be working with a lot of MEs and switching sources, they might find this a little more limiting because they're not going to be able to easily access all of those until they, unless they want to drop back to the UI or start using macros to do it. Finally, connectivity. The small panel uses a USB connection, whereas the large panel is Ethernet. So this could be a big advantage for people who might be looking to put the panel a far distance away from the main TC1 unit itself, because Ethernet is much easier to extend over a long distance, whereas USB you need to use an extender and deal with power, and some work well, extension systems, and some don't. So certainly if distance is something they're looking to place this far away from, the LP would be a better choice. On the flip side, if somebody's looking for a very portable system and they don't want to have to deal with additional networking, they just want to plug the control panel in and go, USB has that advantage because it just plugs in locally, it supplies power and everything, and you're ready to run. And that does bring up the last thing, which is power. The small panel gets its power from USB, so no additional power is required, whereas the large panel does need an additional power outlet because it needs that supplementary power to operate. So that is just a quick description of the 2 different control panels. Just keep that in mind when you're talking to clients based on the size of their production, that they're really could be in some cases one of these panels will be an ideal fit for their needs. All right, let's continue on and talk about IP series for a moment. IP series, I know not all resellers here are IP series resellers, but I just want to give, for those of you who are, I just want to give you an update on what the latest is here. First of all the new TC1 kind of features like dual channel streaming, dual channel Skype, the 4K UHD, all of that comes to IP series as a free software upgrade. So any clients out there who have a system, they can download the software is available today, already available, not that it was available today, it's already available, and they can install it and gain all these new features. But beyond that, there's been a few other enhancements to IP series as well. So the first is that there is now a 3RU redundant power supply configuration available for IP series. So now for clients clients looking at IP series and maybe redundant power was something that was very important to them, that is now an option that you can get. And in fact, on IP series, the redundant power configuration is actually the same price that the 2RU non-redundant used to be, and that option is still available. So you can still get IP series in a non-redundant power supply, but that's now available at a lower price point. So it does give also options for people to get into an IP series level solution at even a lower price point than they could previously. If you look at the back of this unit, it does look very similar to TC1. And in fact, all the video and audio connectors are exactly the same in the sense of where they're placed and how they work and what they can do. Where the differences are, though, do come into the graphics card and the computer motherboard. So in this case, this unit's got 5 graphics card outputs, which you can use any 4 of those 5 for multi-view displays. It's the same rules that we find on TC1, a maximum of 1920 by 1200 with a 1920 by 1080 really being the recommended or minimum resolution that should be used. On here we have 1 DVI, 1 HDMI, and then 3 display ports. And again, converters, adapters are not included, so make sure that you include the appropriate converters as necessary for the amount of displays somebody might look to connect up. And then when we look at the computer motherboard, it's got many of the same ports, but this unit has 4 Ethernet connectors on it. So it's got 2 1 gig Ethernet connectors and 2 10 gig Ethernet connectors. And that's another big difference here is the amount of network bandwidth that is available on this unit and just the number of networks I can connect it to because I've got, you know, twice as many ports to connect to multiple networks if necessary. So that's the new 3RU IP series unit. There's also a new control surface that's available for IP series as well. So the 4-stripe has been available and is still available, but we have introduced the 2-stripe control surface, which you can put on the system, and this will allow for people where space might be a concern. A 4-stripe is just too big to fit in the location they need, or price as well, because the 2-stripe is less expensive. So when you pair a 2-stripe control panel with a 2RU non-redundant power supply, it does give somebody the ability to get into an IP series system at a much lower price point than they maybe were used to previously. So just keep that in mind as well. Both of these control surfaces do use Ethernet for connection. They do require external power. Keep that in mind. They both come with LCD readouts for the mnemonics on the buttons. They both have LCD readouts for the DDR, so you can see the clip name and the time code readouts. They both have the keypad. You can fire off macros just by punching in their numbers. So there are now 2 options for control surfaces based on the size and needs of your client on IP series. And then finally, one last product I want to talk about that's part of the IP series line is the IP series Studio Expansion Module. Now, this was what was called the out module originally when we first introduced IP series, but with the creation of the Connect line, this product also got renamed to the Studio Expansion Module. And what this does is this is a 2-rack unit box that gives you 4 additional 3G SDI outputs along with some analog audio on it that you can use to route more outputs out of an IP series system. Now, I know some people might say, well, hold it, your new NC1IO that you guys just introduced, that also has output, so why would I want this? Because it seems like the NC1IO might be the better choice. It's got 8, connectors. It can do more outputs or inputs or a combination and stuff. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the big difference here is that this box has additional compositing capability, layering capability on those outputs. So if somebody needs to output not just a video, but they need to include additional graphics, they need to do positioning, maybe branding, multiple languages for different titles and stuff in different languages, this box would be a good choice that they could hook to the system and allow them to do that kind of stuff, which a NC1IO would not let you do. That is strictly just going to output a channel of video. It has no compositing capabilities. So I don't want to call these MEs because they're not as powerful as MEs, but certainly if you're thinking of things MEs can do, this can do to some level of that. So you can kind of think of it as a way to get like more layered ME-like output out of an IP series system. So again, probably not something that every user who buys an IP series system is going to need, but if somebody's doing a very large production, they need a lot of outputs with a lot of layering, this gives you that ability to expand the output of that system and give you that. And this box is only available to IP series resellers, so TriCaster resellers do not have access to the IP series Studio Expansion module, so just keep that in mind as well. All right, the last thing to talk about an IP series is just a little bit of a side-by-side of TC1 versus the IP series, because when we had the original TriCasters, 8,000, 460, stuff like that, it was a very clear division in many cases as to, where a TriCaster started and ended and where an IP series began. But with TC1, that has changed a lot. It's certainly blurred that line much more so, because TC1 honestly has some IP series like functionality inside of it. So I want to go through and just kind of talk about where the differences are, so that when you're talking to a client, you can be putting them in the proper system, or realizing that, hey, this is other stuff this system offers beyond just more inputs, because I know that's probably the one thing everybody does know, but you might not realize these other differences as well. So when we look at the number of inputs, obviously external inputs, TriCaster TC1 is 16, IP series is 44, so there's a very big difference right there. But also output wise, TC1 allows for a maximum of 10 outputs simultaneously. So the 4 SDIs, if you plugged in SDI inputs, they'll be turned into NDI. If you put the 2 channels of Skype on air, those will become NDI outputs. And if you're running in a 3G or lower SDI mode, you'll have 4 mix outputs that are also all available as NDI. So that gives you the ability to have basically 10 channels of NDI output that could go to other parts of your production and facility in there. But if we go over and look at IP series, you can see it's a drastically more amount of NDI output, almost 4 times the amount of NDI output. It's got the same stuff that you'll find on a TC1, the inputs, outputs, and the 2 channels of Skype, but beyond that, all 4 DDRs are available as NDI outputs automatically. There's also a feature that's a IP series only feature called the NDI matrix router. This gives you 8 additional routable NDI outputs that you can assign on your control surface. You could make macros to control these, or control them from the UI, that allow you to control those outputs with different content. You've got on-screen monitors or remote displays that you need to control them, not just feed a single signal, but you need to be able to switch that from the switcher. This gives you 8 more outputs that you can set up and do that from. And then all the buffers are also available as NDI as well. Now, certainly on an IP or a TC1, you could route some things to an output to, if I want a DDR as a dedicated output, I could route it to an output and do that. But on a TC1, I'm using up an output to make that happen. Whereas on an IP series system, the DDR is available completely independently. I don't have to use up that output to route that DDR somewhere else in my facility. So just keep that in mind, that on a larger production where they might need to get a lot of sources in different places, IP series really is going to make that much easier. And I'll just give you a little example of some people we've talked to where this does come into play. Esports is one. When they're doing a large production, it's not necessarily just the main output that they need to get to the users, but they've got all sorts of displays on the stage, for both the players and people in the stadium, and they want to control all this stuff. And again, having all these outputs where I can throw a graphic in a buffer, and then anything that's assigned to watch that buffer automatically is going to display it, could be very powerful in those kind of workflows. All right, ME-wise, you get 4 MEs in a TC1, 8 in an IP series. The MEs are otherwise capable of doing the same thing in both. You just get twice as many inside an IP series system. The built-in web apps, if you're not familiar, if you haven't seen it, on a IP series system, there's a set of built-in web applications you can pull up in a web browser. These allow you to do things like remote switching, DDR management, where you can load and organize clips and play clips. There's an audio mixer, and you can adjust audio levels. There's a trigger panel, and you can set up macro triggers on it. And all these, you can have multiple people all using them simultaneously. So it really gives you a way to expand that control of an IP series system to multiple users simultaneously. Those are included with an IP series system out of the box. On TriCaster TC1, those web apps are not included. Now, at some point in the future, they will be included. Well, I'm sure, sorry, not included. They will be available as a additional add-on option. I don't know when or how much that will be. So, I mean, it is something you'll be able to add, but IP series does include it out of the box. Now, that doesn't mean that TC1 doesn't support if you custom write your own web app, or, you know, if there's an application out there that already does web apps. It has the web app controller capability in it. It just doesn't include the built-in web apps that you would find in a TC1. So again, that could be a very nice enhancement that IP series users get today automatically with their system. Audio mixer. Both systems include 4 mixes, but you get twice as many audio channels in IP series. You get 8 channels of audio per mix versus 4. So for clients who are maybe doing a lot of multi-language type production, or they need to produce a lot of mix minuses, or just keep audio channels separated from each other for their productions, they're going to find that they can do a lot more of that with an IP series system, having twice as many channels available. When it comes to clip players, you get 2 clip players like TriCasters have always had, but you get 4 clip players in an IP series system. And I'll just point out that it wasn't too long ago that one of the most requested features to be added to TriCaster was more DDRs, and IP series gives you more DDRs. So just keep that in mind when you're talking about you know, clip playback capability. Something that everybody so desperately wanted is included in IP series, just as in the default product. Multi-viewers, you get 3 on a TriCaster TC1, you get 4 on IP series. All of those can be set up with independent outputs on each as to how you want that multi-viewer configured and what sources are on it, so keep that in mind. Control surfaces, as we've talked about already, TriCaster TC1 is compatible with any of the TriCaster control surface line, whereas IP series is compatible with the IP series line of control surfaces. So the IP series control surfaces are a little more powerful with the LCD readouts and the LCD readout on the DDR controller, which I admit is very nice, but those can only be used on the appropriate system. And then the last thing is the Ethernet ports. And this might just seem like a little checkbox that, hey, this one's got 2 and this one's got 4, but this really does mean a lot more than it might look like just on the surface. The 2 1 gig ports on a TC1 will, you know, give you the bandwidth you need to do, you know, what that system's capable of. But when we're talking about IP native systems and IP workflows, bandwidth becomes every bit as important as CPU speed, graphics card processing capabilities, you know, hard drive performance, memory access speed, all these things that in the past we looked at as to like, well, the better this is, the more powerful the system is. Well, network bandwidth is just like that when you're dealing with that, because the more network bandwidth I have, the more I can do with stuff on the network. And an IP series system with those 10 gig ports on there actually has 11 times more Ethernet bandwidth than what you'll find on a TC1. In fact, even if you just use one 10 gig port, and that's it on an IP series system, and let's say you use both of the TC1 Ethernet ports, you're still 5 times more network bandwidth. So it's a lot more. And for people out there looking to do large productions, especially people who are looking at 4K UHD type solutions, they should really be looking at IP series as a solution for that, because that network bandwidth is going to become important for them. Maybe not right at the beginning, but potentially over time, that is something that, you know, your production will grow, your capabilities will grow, new features, new products out there, and then you'll be like, oh, now I need that bandwidth. And so having it on the IP series is definitely going to be a very big advantage that system has to offer. And it's something that should not be overlooked or not be downplayed just with, oh, you know, yeah, it's got 2 network ports and you're good. I mean, it might be good for now, but boy, having 10 gig networking is definitely something that they're not going to be upset about having it in the future. All right, let's talk about our Connect boxes. So we used to have what was called the IP series in module, but with the introduction of some new Connect boxes, we've basically created an entire new product line of Connect IO boxes that NewTek offers. This starts with the software-only Connect Pro software, where you can build your own solution. So that's part of that as well. But I want to focus really here is on the hardware-based Connect boxes. So we currently have 2 hardware-based Connect units. The first And the one that's the lower picture that you see on here is the NC1 Studio Input module. This is what we had previously when we first introduced IP Series. It's been renamed and branded as the NC1 Studio Input. This is an input-only module. It gives you 4 SDI inputs. It also does have analog audio on here as well, and will allow you to hook up 4 more SDI inputs, 3G SDI inputs into the system. The new unit that we just introduced at NAB is the upper box you see, which is the NC1 Studio I/O module. This one offers 8 connectors that can either be inputs or outputs. You can set up on a input by input basis which one is which. So you could have, all 8 in, all 8 out, 4 in, 4 out, 6 in, 2 out, whatever combination you want to come up with, you can choose in there. A few other little differences between these units. The Studio I/O module does include a dual power supply as standard, whereas the input module is a single power supply. So just keep that in mind, that if you have a client where dual power supplies is very important to them, then they're definitely going to want the I/O modules, because those include the dual power supplies as well. Both these systems do include 2 Ethernet jacks, along with some USB connectors and video connectors for hooking up a local monitor. Now, the systems can run headless. You do need to set them up at least once with a keyboard, mouse, and monitor to get them configured the way you need. But once you've done that, you could run them without a display, and you just plug in your stuff and they'll work. That being said, I'd always recommend having a display, keyboard, and mouse on them if at all possible. So I'd only run them headless if that's absolutely what you needed to do. But they will operate in that manner. And the last thing I want to mention on these boxes is that the ports on that NC1 Studio I/O module, they are not BNC connectors. They are called DIN 1.0/2.3 connectors. And the cables you need to use this with are not included with the unit. So just make sure that if you sell one of these and the client is going to be hooking up devices, if the devices are BNC, which, let's be honest, that's probably very likely what they will be, that you include the appropriate amount of cables for them, or that they know that this is what they need to get their inputs adapted to. So if you're not familiar with these, I just got a little picture. Here's what one looks like. It's about a 1-foot cable I've got here. They do make other lengths, but it is the DIN connector on one end. It actually kind of slides back, and then you connect it on there. And then the other end is just a BNC connector on there that I can just plug a regular BNC cable on. So, potentially you might need up to 9 of these if you're going to be, having to use all 9 ports, the 8 connectors plus Genlock, if Genlock is important for that need. So make sure that the ones you get are 3G SDI rated, so that they would be supported for doing 3G formats or 4K UHD 60 frame rate formats, because that would be required. But these would be the kind of cables that you would need to add to that system to give you, the connectivity to connect up to. So, and then the last thing I want to mention is we also, there is information on the website about this, but we are coming out with another Connect box in the future that's going to be called the Connect IP box. And this one will allow you to connect into a SMPTE 2022 workflow. So if you have a client and they've already adopted into the SMPTE 2022 workflow, and you need to interconnect with that to get sources in or out, our Connect IP box will let you bring up to 3 channels of SMPTE 2022 in or out of the unit. And this box will also be firmware upgradable to the 2110 standard or the 2210 standard when ratified. I don't know, that's this year, next year possibly, but that's a box that will be coming out. And like I said, if you go to our website, you can get a little more info on it as well. All right, the last thing before we take a look at the new features here, I just want to talk about maximizing your NDI bandwidth, because this is something that these new systems can really benefit from, and you might not be aware that you can do. So if you notice, the TC1, all the Connect boxes, the Studio Expansion module, and even IP Series, they all have more than one Ethernet port on it. And NDI has been built with support to support multiple Ethernet connections. Now, some of you might be like, yeah, I know what that is. That's called link aggregation, right? That's where I take multiple ports and I plug them into a switch that supports link aggregation, and then I can make it run, faster or give me more bandwidth. Well, I mean, there is that, and yes, link aggregation might be an option in some cases, the 802.3 AD, but this is not required for any of this to work. All right, this is protocol level support built into NDI. What that means is I can take a completely unmanaged, or AKA dumb switch, and plug in the Ethernet ports on the back of my unit, and NDI will automatically take advantage of that and send multiple links of video across the multiple links of Ethernet. Now, it's not going to take a single NDI source and split it across them, but you connect up your first NDI source and that will run across Ethernet link 1. You connect up your second one, it will run across link 2, and as you add more, it kind of spreads them around and puts them on the different links in there. So this gives you the ability that, like on a TC1 with two 1 gig Ethernet ports on it, I could plug in both and have 2 gigabits of bandwidth available. So I'm basically doubling how much I/O throughput you have available on the system. So ultimately what this comes down to is that if you're not using that second Ethernet port for some reason, you're not hooking it to a secondary network to get access to other sources or devices or something like that, take another Ethernet cable and plug that second port into the switch so that you get the advantage of both. And you can do this on all the products with multiple Ethernet ports and effectively give you more bandwidth that you can work with. And now more people can access more stuff simultaneously when you do that. So just a little note to be aware of, and can really help in some cases where you might have a lot of people who all want to share the same source simultaneously. Okay, let's take a look at some of these new features more in depth. Now, this is not going to be a full-on TriCaster, how do you do everything demo. All I'm going to point out here are the new features found in TC1 that are beyond what you'd find in a normal TriCaster. So I'm not going to talk about DDRs and switching and downstream keyers. Those things haven't switched or changed in functionality. So you can go watch some of the previous videos or the training videos we have online and learn how to do all that kind of stuff. But this is the new stuff that's in there. So now I'm showing it to you on an IP series system, but everything I'm showing you here will be exactly the same on a TC1 in how these new features work. So when you go there, you'll be able to do it exactly the same way. So the first one feature is the dual channel streaming. So when you go into the stream and code panel on here and hit the button, you'll see that a brand new streaming panel appears. All right, that is completely different than what we had before. In this panel, you'll see there's a 1 and a 2 column in there. These 2 columns represent the 2 channels of built-in streaming, and each one of these channels can be set up with different parameters in here. So for example, if I just go and click on channel 1 and hit the gear, it opens up the encoder settings, and now at the top to start with, we do have some presets we can go with. So I could just pick one of these to begin with, or I have the ability to override any of those and punch in exactly what I want in there. I want to have 1920 by 1080, and I want to let's say do 60 frames per second, and then down here I can choose my bit rate that I want, and you'll notice there's even a little quality meter that shows you based upon your settings how good that potential stream will be. So even before you hit stream, you have an idea of, is this going to look good or not, and you're not trying to necessarily guess all the time as to what some of these settings might be. And then there's also settings over here for the audio and how many channels of audio and stuff that you want sent over the stream as well. So you can set up stream 1, you can set up stream 2. Each stream can have its own independent settings on it. So a perfect example, you want to stream to Facebook and YouTube. Facebook maxes out at 720. YouTube could stream up to 4K. Now I could have one stream at 720, one at 4K, and stream at the best possible content quality that both of those CDNs would allow for simultaneously in there. Also, if you hit the source setup button here, this is where you can set up what gets attached to those 2 streams. So you'll see over here it says stream 1 and stream 2, and when I click on it, you can choose, like stream 1 is going to get mix 1, stream 2 could get a different mix or different audio. So again, if one stream was English and the other was Spanish, you could do something like that with it as well. The last few things in here, the panel for setting up new inputs. This should look kind of familiar with what's in TriCaster. It's the same thing where you select the different selection you want. Let's say I wanted Twitch in there, and then you just sign in and do the stuff you want. But what I do want to point out is that this is the only streaming methods that are now supported, is the kind of the new style streaming. There is no Flash using the Adobe Flash Live Media Encoder. So if for some reason you need to use that, you're going to have to use the custom settings on here. There is no Windows Media Streaming. So for maybe that one guy out there who's still using Windows Media, he's going to have to do that externally or switch to something a little more common. Also, the H.264 encoding is also part of this now. It's no longer in the record panel. It's now been moved into the streaming panel. So you notice on here I have these ones called file capture, and I can add in new file captures in here by selecting this off the list. You can then choose where these files go, what drive and location and file name in there, and which one goes with them. So this will allow you to record those H.264 encodes. And the real nice thing now, because this is something as well that people have been asking for a long time, is, hey, I want an H.264 file, and I have very specific parameters in which that H.264 file must be encoded. I need this bit rate and this frame size and this frame rate and all that kind of stuff. Well, before, we gave you just a kind of a very simple list of a few options, and if what you needed wasn't one of those, then you had to go through and convert on a second step. Now, you can punch these settings in that you need directly and record that right off the system with the parameters you need. One other aspect that's also nice in here is that square streaming is becoming a more popular thing. Facebook has kind of reported that streams that are sent out square aspect ratio actually get a higher view rate than if they're widescreen, because when people hold their phones, it doesn't matter which way they hold it, they get a decent sized image either way. And if you think, a lot of people like to hold their phones actually portrait mode, so it gives them better than that widescreen view in there. So you could go in here and punch in like a 720 by 720 aspect ratio, or pixel size, to give you a 1-to-1 aspect ratio. And as well, to work with that, we've also added in the monitors here under the overlays a square safe area, so you can even see where the safe, what part of the stream would fit within that 1-to-1 aspect ratio. So for people looking to stream that way, which you are starting to see more people do that, all of that is built in to the system as well. So that is the new streaming encoder settings that are built into TC1 and IP series. The next new feature is the Skype TX support. Now, to take advantage of this, there are a couple things you need to do in advance. The first is you do have to put a password on the system. So when you get your TriCaster TC1 or your IP series system, there is no password on it by default, all right? And so you can do everything else, but the Skype TX will not be able to be taken advantage of until a computer password has been put on. The password can be anything you want, all right? And in fact, it's really that way so that you can secure this and make it so that only people who need to access those Skype channels will be able to do so. So you're gonna go into Windows, add a computer password, make sure you remember what it is, because you're going to need that to log back in and to access Skype off of it. But once you've done that, then you go back into the TriCaster or IP series system. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to set up the 1 or 2 Skype channels you want to use. Now, the way you do that is in the multi-view area. I'm going to go to input 7 in here, and I'm just going to double click and open up. And when you click this little drop down in here, you'll see that not only do I have access to the 4 inputs, but you can see there's the 2 Skype caller channels that are available. So I'm going to put Skype channel caller 1 in input 7, and I'm going to put Skype caller 2 in input 8. All right, and now that I've done that, you can see that after a few seconds, those appear with a Skype logo. Now, there's 2 ways the Skype logo will appear. If it appears like it currently is, which is, Skype with just a big color cycling background on it, that means that you've put the channel on, basically you've activated it, but it's not under control yet. Nobody has grabbed control of these channels to use them. So to control these channels, we need to use what is called Skype TX Control. Now, Skype TX Control is a free application available from Microsoft. You can just go to Microsoft.com. In the little search panel up in the upper corner, just type in Skype TX, and the first thing that comes up on the list is the downloads for the Skype TX Control application. Download that, install it on another Windows computer that's on the same network, and then you're ready to start controlling these channels. So let's go take a look at that here. So I'm going to switch over to my laptop, and I'm going to open up Skype TX Control. So this is what Skype TX Control looks like. When you first start it, you're going to log in with your Skype account, which I've already done. So I'm logged in as my Skype account up here. On the left side are all the Skype users that are associated with this account. And as you add new Skype users, make them friends and stuff, that this list will populate with the new stuff in there. And on the right side, this is where you're going to add in the Skype channels that you want to communicate with. So what you need to do is right in this little field where it says add a Skype TX unit to control. Let me zoom in so you can see that a little better. All right, you're going to type in either the computer name or IP address of the Skype unit in question. So on my TriCaster, or IP series really in this case, but TriCaster, if you click the little globe in the upper right corner, you can go down here. You can see the IP of my system, 192.168.1.136. So I'm going to go into here and I'm going to type in 192.168.1.136. I'm also going to copy it really quick, and you hit plus. And when you do that, it's going to come up and set up a channel in here. Now, the first time you do this, there is going to be one extra thing it does, which I've already done, and so it's not asking me to do it again. But the very first time you do this, it's going to ask you for the username and password of your TriCaster system. So again, that password you set up in Windows, you're going to type in your username, which is going to be usually TC1 or VMC1, depending on what system you're on. And then whatever password that you put in Windows, you're going to enter that as well. After you've done that, now the system can talk to it. And then when you add the channel, you're going to get to this screen, which is going to ask which channel do you want. So Skype channel 1 or Skype channel 2. Now also, just a little thing to be aware of, these channels only appear if you've added the Skype caller in a multi-view on the TriCaster or IP series system. So if you've not added the Skype caller yet, all right, then there's no channels for you to select. So it is important that you first set up the Skype channel before you try to connect to it, because otherwise there's just nothing to connect to. So I'm going to set up channel 1, and then I'm going to set up the other one in here, and channel 2. So there are my two Skype channels. And if we switch back over to the IP series system here, and you look now at those multi-views, you can see those multi-views no longer have the Skype logo. They now are a test pattern with a little, it's hard to see, but a little tiny Skype logo bouncing around in it. When you see it that way, that's your indicator that these Skype channels are now being controlled by somebody. So you know that they're ready to be used. All right, so now we can go back to control, and I want to show one last thing here, which is this software can control multiple systems simultaneously. So it's not limited to only controlling the two channels of Skype TX in the TriCaster. I can go in here, and I happen to have a talk show on my network as well. So I'm going to go type in that machine as well and hit plus. Now, this is a single channel talk show, so it doesn't ask me which channel. It's just, there's one, so it takes the only channel available. But you can see now channel input 3 here is actually my single channel talk show. And now I actually have 3 channels of Skype available to me between the 2 in the TriCaster unit and the 1 in the talk show. So I just want to show that, you can certainly control multiple channels in here simultaneously. But I'm going to remove that channel just so it doesn't get confusing. So now let's call one of my, call one of these channels. And so I can either call by selecting from the list in here, and then let's say I want to call my phone. All right. So I'm going to select Kane Peterson. I'm going to hit call. It's going to ask which channel do I want to call on. Let's call on channel 1. All right. And I'm going to switch over to my phone and my video. So there's my phone. All right. It says somebody's calling. I'm going to open this up and open up Skype. All right, which I gotta type in the password to. Hopefully you didn't see what I just typed in password-wise. All right, so there is Skype running on my phone in there. And you can see the video, that's going to you guys is also going into my phone on there. And if we look at the system here, let me turn the video on because it wasn't on there. You can see input 7 is video. It will take it a second here for the video to start up. There it goes. All right, so there's the camera off my phone. All right, showing up on input 7 in there. And let's go back over to the Skype TX control software. And I'm just going to set my phone down here. So let's see if I can set this up where maybe it's pointing at me a little bit as we're doing this. Yeah, it's a little better. All right, so you can see in the window here, I've got the incoming Skype call. There's what I'm returning back to my Skype caller. Let's zoom in so you can see that a little better. Below that, we have the incoming and outgoing call parameters. So the call coming from my phone is a 720p call, and the outgoing call is 720p going back. And one thing I just want to show you is kind of cool here is I can even see if I take my phone, all right, that I'm holding here, and I turn it 90 degrees, so I'm holding it portrait, right, this way, right? Notice that it should, in a second here, tell me that my phone is being held that way in here as well. I don't know why it's not doing that. It should. Oh, there it goes. So you can now it says portrait in here. So you can even see which way the phone is being held by your user. So if they're holding it the wrong way, you can tell them, hey, turn that 90 degrees because that's not the way it should be. We can also go to some video and audio settings in here. So this allows you to do things like control where the Skype logo is placed on the screen, or enable or disable internal Skype audio processing. This is actually a very powerful and big feature of Skype TX because Skype, the desktop version, includes a bunch of pre-built audio, audio gain control, echo cancellation, noise reduction and stuff. And when you're dealing with laptop to laptop, yes, it's great to have those things. But when we are using broadcast gear and we can set up mix minuses and we can control the audio levels to a much better degree than what you're going to get just off of your laptop, then we don't really want that additional audio processing. We want to control it all using the mixer and the audio equipment that we have. So being able to go and turn off all that built-in Skype audio processing is actually a very big and important feature that you find in Skype TX systems like TalkShow or the Skype TX built into TriCaster as well. And then the last feature we also have is our snapshot feature. So if I use this to grab a little photo of myself in there. Oh, I'm looking up a little bit. Look, I got to look at my phone. All right, so there I go. I've grabbed that picture off my phone. And now if the quality of my connection was going up or down, because let's say I was on a cellular signal, I can choose a minimum resolution that I find acceptable for that call. And if it drops below that, we can have it go to the still photo. So you can see right now it's outputting the still photo as the video. And then as soon as the call quality returns, we can go back to live video again in there. So again, just features that are in here that allow you to really control that call and get the best possible quality out of it. Now, a couple last things are also, once we set up these Skype calls, if you go to your audio mixer, you'll notice that the inputs that have Skype on it get a little Skype icon included with them as well. And that is just saying that these channels have the Skype mix minusing automatically included with those channels. It's all set up for you automatically. So when you're using the two channels of Skype built in, you don't have to deal with any mix minus. All of that is just automatically handled for you. So if you had two callers who called in, each caller would be able to talk to the other one, but they wouldn't be hearing themselves. So it's real slick. It works really nice. And this is outside the 4 channels of audio mixing that are in there. So it's really like you get 4 channels of audio mixing plus these 2 special mix minuses for the Skype channels as well on top of that. And the last thing you'll also notice is that there's a talkback slider in here in the audio mixer, and this allows you to set up the talkback channel. So what you do is you go into the gear and you can set up what input you want to use for talkback. That could be a physical input, that could be an NDI input coming off of another computer that's got an NDI audio source. That could be the sound card on the back of the computer that you might want to use. So you could choose your source in here, and then you'll see that below the channels 7 and 8, might be a little hard to see here, but there's a little talk button in there. So if you click that button, that will implement talkback to that to that user. So you could go in there and just turn them on or off, or turn them both on or off as necessary, so that you can have the ability to talk to those people outside the production. So that's how the Skype TX integrated in works. Set up the 2 channels, install the Skype TX client software, connect them together, and you're basically ready to go at that point. Okay, a couple last things I just want to show in, let me hang up my Skype call here. All right. So a couple last things I want to show in here are some other features that you find in TriCaster TC1 and IP series. And the next one is the DDR transcoding feature. So if I go to a DDR and I load a clip in here, I'm just going to go browse and find some clip out of my hard drive. You'll notice that when this clip loads, all right, it's got this little T icon down in the corner. All right, that T means that this clip has not been transcoded into the favored format that TriCaster likes to work with. Now, this does not mean that everything has to be transcoded. All right, we will still attempt to play back anything that you throw in there, and there's still a ton of stuff we will play back without a problem. But, you know, some codecs and some formats are more difficult to play than others. Case in point, looking at this clip right here. So if you look at the DDR right here, there's the DDR, here's the clip. I'm going to scrub this clip, and notice as I scrub it, you know, I'm scrubbing back and forth as fast as I can across, but it's only updating, what, a couple times a second in there? So that just gives you an idea of, you know, this is an MPEG-4 clip. That's how much difficulty there is in playing back MPEG-4. The system will play it, but you'll notice that in scrubbing it, it really, you know, it's still a little laggy, and, you know, just because that clip requires that much power to do it. So what I can do is I can go down to this clip, I can right click on it, and there's a transcode option, and I'll select this, and at the bottom of the DDR it now says transcoding is in progress, and this bar will go across. I'm still able to do everything in the system I would normally be able to do, but this clip in the background is being converted, and I could select a bunch of clips and do this all at once, so it doesn't have to be done one by one. But when this is done, then this clip, which was MPEG-4, is going to be automatically swapped out for the newly transcoded clip. All right, so it's almost done in there. Let me zoom back down so you can see it. Okay, it just finished, and you'll notice that the little T icon has gone away. And now, if you look at this DDR icon in here that's showing the video, I'm going to scrub this, and notice that as fast as I scrub, it's able to keep up. So that really kind of shows you the difference in performance that you would get by transcoding clips into the favored format, which is SpeedHQ. So again, if you just want to make files in this format, just get the SpeedHQ codecs, install them on a machine, export in SpeedHQ, and then, you know, everything comes in, it's ready to go. In HD and lower modes, this is probably not as required, but I will say in 4K UHD modes, clip playback is extremely difficult to play back a very large 4K clip. In those cases, this transcoding feature could be very important that you do, so that clips are in the easiest possible playback format for the system to work with. So built-in transcoding. Now, of course, the import feature is still there and will transcode. So if you just use that, that will work. But this is a nice way where you might import the clip and then realize, it needs to be transcoded after the fact. You can right-click and do it right in a DDR now. All right, the last new thing I want to show in here is in the record panel. You'll notice that there are local and external recording in here. All right, the local recording are the 4 channels of recording built into the TriCaster TC1 or IP series system, and that can be any physical input on the system or any of the mix outputs. So notice I can record mix 1 through 4 because those are the outputs. I can capture inputs 1, 2, 7, or 8. All right, the reason those are the selections is that 1 and 2 are SDI connected inputs, 7 or 8 are Skype channels. So I can either record Skype channels, SDI inputs, or outputs on there. The rest of the inputs, 3, 4, 5, 6, notice none of those are available as recording options because those are NDI channels coming in. All right, so to record those, I would need to use NDI ISO recorder, or if it is a supported external system like an NC1IO, I could trigger recording on it, and that is what happens under the external category. So notice right now there's nothing in that list. It says input 9 and 10 and 3 and 4, but notice they're ghosted. I can't actually select them in there. So let me connect up some NC1IO inputs and show you how this works here. So I'm going to go to input 9 and 10, and we're going to go in and I'm going to set up, where's my NC1? There it is. I'm going to bring in inputs 1 and 2 off of that. All right. These happen to be exactly the same inputs that are coming into inputs 1 and 2 locally on the TriCaster, but I am also have them plugged into my NC1IO, so they're coming in this way now as well. So now, if I go into my record panel, you notice that 9 and 10 are now lit up, right? They're no longer ghosted out. And in fact, you can even see them in the drop-down list when I select them, that there are options that are available. So I can now turn these on, and when I hit record in my system, not only will it record any locally set up channels on the system, this will also tell the system to record up to 4 channels on an external system that supports recording as well. Now, the recording is actually happening on the external system. So you have to, on that system, set up the path as to where the files are going to go and all that kind of stuff, and make sure there's a destination and enough storage and all that. All this is doing is telling that system to record. It's not like making this system itself do the recording. So just keep that in mind. But basically using that now, you can have 4 channels of local recording plus 4 channels of triggered external recording going on, all with a single button press of recording inside the system. Okay, so that kind of takes you through what's new in TriCaster TC1 and IP series with the new software upgrade. The last couple things I want to go to before we get to the 4K is also the NC1IO module. This is the new capture solution. So we just switched over to its interface here, and you can set this up to operate in a couple of different modes. That is selectable by using the display button at the bottom, and in here you can choose how you want the screen laid out. So right now I'm in a quad link on the top and 4 SDIs on the bottom, but there are options for every single possible combination you could come up with. If I want, all 8 inputs or all 8, in there, or I could view 4 at a time, or I could view any one of them by themselves, or I could do 2 quad links, or a quad link and 4 SDIs, however it needs to be set up in there, you can find the appropriate layout. Now, the other thing besides choosing the layout that works for your needs is you need to set up the inputs and outputs to operate as you need them to be. Do I need all ins, all outs, or some combination of ins or outs? And that can be done using the gear in the upper right corner of the interface here. And where it says configure IO connectors, you can click on this. And in this panel that opens, let me bring this on the screen so you can hopefully see it a little better. Let's go right into the middle, because that'll make it easier to drag this where it needs to go. Okay, there we go. Now you can see it. So this is the panel you can use to choose whether it's an in or an out. Now the way this works is that there's 8 connectors on the back. Ins start at 1 and go towards 8, and outs start at 8 and go towards 1. So I happen to be right now in this selected one right here, which is 4 ins and 4 outs. This will let me bring a quad, a 4K in and a 4K out, or 4 HD ins and 4 HD outs, or some combination thereof. But notice that there are options for whatever combination you need. I need 6 in, 2 out. I need 1 in, 7 out. Whatever it is, pick it off the list, and then the system will set itself up that way. You do have to exit out of the software and restart it, though, if you do change that configuration. So just be aware of that it's not a live change. You change it, quit. You don't have to reboot the whole system. Just quit the software, relaunch it, and then it will set itself up on the next launch in that mode. So now that we have that, now we can go into any of these sources and set them up. So along the bottom in my system are my 4 SDI sources. So if I go in here and select one, I can choose what source I'm actually looking to bring in. I can choose, again, audio-wise, there's the audio levels. I can choose whether or not another source is being used as an alpha channel for this one. So all these settings are in here. If you're setting something out as an output, which is what this top monitor is set up in, I could select that in here. And you notice I've set an NDI input as the video source. So under the output type, I can choose what kind of output I want from this source. So I happen to have mine in quad link 4K, so I'm actually outputting my camera feed, which is just HD actually, but I'm outputting it as 4K 60 frame rate out of the box in here. And this is also where you can set up the directories that it's going to record to. Do realize there's minimal storage on Connect boxes, so it is really intended that you're going to record to external storage, be it USB 3 or probably what would be even more recommended is some kind of shared storage like a SAN or a NAS or something like that. But nonetheless, whatever drive letter mount that storage would be on, you could go direct it to that location in there. And then finally, there is also color correction capability, so you can also make some of those adjustments as well. Now, a couple other things on recording. The system supports recording of inputs, not of outputs. So just keep that in mind that you can record SDIs coming in, but it does not record SDIs going out. So you can go in there, and in some cases the record button you'll see still lights up, but you notice it's ghosted out. I can't select it, whereas on an input the record button is fully illuminated and allows me to access. So just keep that in mind as well. Also, the record buttons are completely independent on every input. So if for whatever reason you need to start and stop them independently of each other, you can do that. There also is a gang recording down here, so you could record multiple channels simultaneously if necessary. And then down in the other corner, let me zoom in so you can see that a little better, is a little audio selection. So by picking one of these in here, this will direct that channel of audio out the sound card output of the system. So you could hook up a set of headphones if you need to monitor the audio levels coming in on that channel of video. So that is the local interface. Now, there is one other way that you can also control some aspects of the Connect I/O box, and that is through a web-based interface. So I'm going to go back over to my laptop here and open up my system. And I'm just going to punch in its IP or machine name in here. And this opens up the web-based interface. So here you can see now the Connect I/O software showing up in a web browser. So with this, I can choose, again, different display options. So I could, say just all I care about is seeing this one display in there, or my 4 inputs coming in. So this allows somebody over the network to monitor the channels going on in here. And again, all the different layouts are available to choose from. You also have the record buttons in here. So somebody could also be triggering recording from here. And there's also a record all function if you want to gang all the recording functions together and do that from there. There's also an image grab if you just need to do an image grab from any of those angles. And they do have a little bit of control where you can also add media or go back to the last selected video source in there. So you're still going to get all the functionality off of the local interface, but again, there is some control that you can do from the web-based interface for starting and stopping recording and monitoring channels in there. It is video only, just to be aware of. It does show you audio meters though, so you can see if audio is playing, but you're not going to hear audio through the web interface, so just keep that in mind. And multiple people can open this up simultaneously. So if 2 people needed to be monitoring it, or maybe 2 people are going to be, managing the recordings of things separately from each other, you could do that as well. So anyways, that is the web-based interface. This is only on the NC1 Studio I/O module. The Studio Input module does not have a web interface on it. So this is just also a feature available just on this model unit. Okay, so that takes us through TriCaster TC1, IP series new features, the Connect I/O box. The last thing I want to talk about is the 4K and how 4K works with NewTek products. So let's switch over and start this PowerPoint. Here we go. So I've got a few more PowerPoint slides, and then I'll just give you a quick demonstration of how this works inside the system. So the first thing is, let's get a little bit of definition out of the way here. So 4K versus UHD versus 2160p. What does this mean? What is the proper terminology, or what is the terminology? So ultra high definition UHD, that is 3840 by 2160 pixels. All right, it's often called 4K, but it's technically called UHD. This is the format that TriCaster TC1 and IP series works in. All right, so when we're talking about 4K in our products, this is the 4K we are talking about. Now, there is a 4K digital cinema or kind of film standard that is slightly higher resolution. It's 4096 pixels by 2160. So notice they're both exactly the same height, 2160 pixels, but they are different widths in there. So 2160 is unfortunately not necessarily enough information to really tell you if something is set up the right way. You need to know whether or not it's UHD or if it's, 4K digital cinema that they might be working with. Because if it's digital cinema, that's not the 4K we want. We want the UHD version. And unfortunately, all of this has gotten really muddied in terminology. We pretty much call anything that's UHD 4K or anything that's 4K UHD. They've almost become interchangeable terms. Most of that is because of the consumer electronics industry wanting to label everything 4K regardless, so that it's got the best name on it. But again, there really is UHD, and you'll notice in new tech marketing when we say 4K, it's usually 4K/UHD, so that we're designating that is the variant of 4K that we are specifically talking about. Okay, so just a little bit on the frame sizes. You can see 4K much larger than HD, but only a little bit smaller than what the digital cinema 4K is. Now frames per second. All right, we do 2160p at up to 60 frames per second, or 50 frames per second if you happen to be in those countries. Most 4K solutions out there right now today are still 25 or 30 frames per second. In fact, I can pretty much tell you if they're not telling you it's 50 or 60 frames a second, then they're 25 or 30 frames per second, because they would tell you otherwise if it was the higher frame rate. This is important because right now most solutions are telling you, well, you have a choice. You can either have better resolution or you can have a smoother picture, but it's one or the other. You can't have both at the same time because, you can work at 60 frame rate in 1080, but as soon as you go to 4K, we're going to say that you have to work in 30 frame rate. And while right now that might be the world we kind of live in because that's how a lot of people are working, I think that when 4K really starts to become much more mainstream, and I know it is already a little bit, but there's still, we're still ahead of the curve on that, I think. I think what we're going to find is that most people who have already spent their time and energy and effort getting to 1080p 60 or 1080p 50 productions are not going to be interested when they go to UHD being told that, oh, by the way, you got to go back in frame rate. You got to go back to 25 or 30. They're going to say, no, I want the frame rate that I've already built my productions around. So I want the resolution and I want the frame rate too. And we are allowing you to have that today. Right? Our products out of the box give you support for these higher frame rate productions. And I think, when you're talking sports, you're talking esports, those people, they're looking at 1080p 60 today with 4K in the future. And I can tell you that they're not going to accept 30 frame rate when they move up. They're going to expect 50 and 60 frame rates. So just keep that in mind. TriCaster, TC1, and IP series are the only software-based 4K solutions, UHD 4K solutions out there that allow you to work at 50 or 60 frame rate. Everything else that I've seen or heard of maxes out at 25 or 30 frame rate. The only other products that would get you the higher frame rates are to go with hardware-based solutions, which will cost a much higher price tag. And as soon as you go into these modes, they typically lose 75% of their functionality because they have to take 4 times, everything becomes 1/4 of what it was. If it was a 16 input system, it becomes a 4 input system. We don't have any of those problems. We're 16 inputs, whether you're in 4K mode or in HD mode or whatever combination you want to mix it up in there. So these are really big things to be aware of that, when we go to 4K, we're giving it to you all, and we're really not saying that you have to deal with any of the limitations that would most other systems tell you that you would have to live with. Okay. So how do you get 4K in? This is where things can get a little confusing because there's no one answer, one method. All right. The fact of the matter is there is no one accepted standard for how to do 4K. So you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to deal with realize that there's going to be multiple ways to do this. Even in a single method type of bringing in 4K, there could be different variants of that as well. So we'll talk about that for a second. The fact of the matter is converter boxes are probably going to be part of the solution for the near-term future. All right, there's just going to be this camera and that device don't have the same kind of connectors on it that are needed, so you're going to have to adapt one into the other. And beyond that, you also got to be aware that some of the cabling and connectors might look similar, but still can vary in performance. So you really are going to have to make sure that, if you're going to go with this kind of cable, that it really is that kind of cable, because otherwise you might be trying to push more bandwidth through it than what that cable is capable of handling, and then you're going to have problems. So the first kind of cable type we're going to look at is HDMI. Now, we do not build any solutions that are HDMI out of the box when it comes to working with 4K. But that being said, it's not that you can't do it. You could get the Connect Pro software and a supported 4K HDMI I/O card and build a solution if that is what you absolutely need. So it is certainly possible to be done, but it's just not a turnkey box that we build. But when it comes to HDMI, there are two major HDMI flavors for doing 4K. The first is HDMI 1.4, which handles up to 30 frame rates, and HDMI 2.0, which handles up to 60 frame rates. Unfortunately, these two cable types are really hard, well, pretty much impossible to tell apart from each other. There's no designating thing you can look for and say, hey, this is an HDMI 2.0 cable. So all I can tell you is make sure you buy the appropriate type of cable you need. Make sure you label that cable so that you know what it is, because if that cable gets coiled up and thrown on the pile with other cables, at that point you're never going to know again what kind of cable it is, because few of these cables are labeled that way. And I would tell you it is needed. If you need to do 60 frame rate, you do need an HDMI 2.0 cable. A 1.4 cable is not going to handle it. You're going to end up with maybe no picture or drop frames and stuff in there, because that cable is just not up to the task of what you need. The next is using SDI, and there's a few ways to do this. The first is to do what's called quad link, and quad link takes 4 SDI connectors, gangs them together to give you one 4K UHD input. And there's 2 levels of quad link input. There's quad link HD SDI. This supports up to 30 frame rate. And there's quad link 3G SDI, and this supports up to 60 frame rate. Basically, what you mainly need to know from all of this is that quad link is the method that NewTek is using. This is what our Connect boxes use. This is what the outputs on the TriCaster and IP series will configure themselves as. So this is what you are looking to get to, and this is what you're looking to come from into other products that are using baseband type signal connections. Now, beyond that, there are other SDI connector types as well. There is dual link 3G SDI. This allows for up to 30 frame rate in UHD. There is 6G SDI, which is predominantly just on Blackmagic products, and this also allows for up to 30 frame rate in UHD. And then there is 12G SDI, which you are seeing a few other products out there support as well. This supports up to 60 frame rate. The one thing just to be aware of as well on the 6G and 12G is that you do need cables rated to handle that, right? So a 3G SDI cable probably is not going to handle these other formats very well at all. And even with the appropriate kind of cable you should have, cable length issues can become a big issue when working with 6 and especially 12G SDI, because they're pushing so much data down that cable that you just can't extend it to the length that you might be used to when working with HD SDI or 3G type signals. So they're out there. Again, we do not make any products that support these formats ourselves, but that isn't to say that you couldn't build one. If you absolutely needed a 12G SDI input into a system, because that's what the client demands, you could build one using Connect Pro and a supported card that has a 12G SDI input. So the options are there. It's just a matter of making sure that you plan out what is needed and either get the right kind of interface, right kind of card, or whatever that would be necessary for that to connect up properly. Now, with the quad link, which is what we are using, there are 2 methods of transporting a signal down that quad link set of connections. And the first method is called square division quad split, and the second is called 2-sample interleave, or sometimes you'll see it shortened down to 2SI. The format that we need, or the format that we use, is the square division quad split. So this is what you want. This is predominantly the more common of the 2, and I believe that virtually any product that supports the 2-sample interleave probably also supports the square division as well. So it's just a matter of switching it to output that format from the system. So anyways, these are the two formats in there, but we want the first one. And the way this one works is that it takes that UHD frame and breaks it into 4 individual HD signals and passes them down the pipe, and then they get reassembled on the other end back into a UHD frame. So this is strictly on the SDI I/O that we're seeing this breakup of the images from the device on both ends. It appears as a single image again. It's just transported this way. This is these 4 images, by the way, if you actually plugged them into a monitor, you actually would see that individual quad showing up. So it really is like 4 independent HD playbacks going on in there, or HD signals going on in there. And the other thing is, it is important that these 4 links be all the same length, right? Don't use a 50-foot cable for one link and like a 6-foot cable for the other, because that's probably going to cause problems because you got the signals going through different lengths of cable between each other. Now, the last way to get 4K, and really ultimately the way you get 4K into a TriCaster TC1 or IP series system is using NDI, because all these products turn these other non-NDI formats into NDI, and that's what we're bringing in. So NDI can be used to bring it in, and any product that can spit out NDI natively could also be used to bring in 4K. So this includes things like our new NVG1 graphics system that we're coming out with. That has the ability to output NDI for CG graphics, so you could use that to bring in material in there. And this all comes in as just a single frame. In fact, it even supports alpha channel in it, so it goes well beyond what SDI itself is even capable of sending it. It doesn't have to divide the signal up or anything. And in fact, because NDI all runs over standard Ethernet, it's also just a single cable type. It's all RJ45 connectors, because that's what you use to hook up your network. So really, in many ways, NDI makes this much simpler than any of the baseband formats, because there we're dealing with different cable types and signal flows and stuff like that. With NDI, you plug it in and you're done. Now, we realize the world is still very much an SDI world, and you're going to have to hook into that. But I think, as you can see, NDI is going to make things a lot easier, and especially I think 4K especially will make IP even much more of the type of workflow that gets productions done. But I just want to show a couple last things about this, because we've all heard about, well, IP is going to make things easier, it's going to make things cheaper, we're going to allow us to do more. Let me just give you a quick example of what that can kind of mean, just in perspectives here. So here is a 40 by 40 12G SDI video router that you can get. All right, it's a Blackmagic. It's fairly inexpensive, really, for what it is, at $5,000. All right, handles 40 channels in, 40 channels out. All right, so that's something you might use to do 4K workflows inside a facility, to route signals around and between devices and stuff. But let's compare that to this network switch. All right, you might say, okay, well, that network switch is a 28 port, 10 gig on every single port network switch. And your first question might be, well, how much is that switch? It must be really expensive. You can buy this switch for just over $2,000. So this switch is less than half the price of the dedicated video network switch. But when we look at the amount of capacity that we can push through those devices to get the same amount of capacity that this Netgear switch has, you would have to get 25 video hubs to have the same amount. And even from there, it's not a fair comparison, because I'd have to cascade video hubs between each other to really allow me to move video around from anything to anything, and things get crazy there, and cascading has limitations with that kind of stuff. Whereas in a network switch, it's just you plug it in and there are packets that go wherever you want. And if I need to expand it further, I can just get another network switch with a 10 gig port and further, really send anything I want between it. But nonetheless, you could see that for $2,000 US gets me the equivalent of $100,000 worth of traditional video routing capability. And so I just want to point this out. This is where IP and leveraging that IP infrastructure can really start to benefit you. I realize most customers probably don't need 25 video hubs to route all the video you want, but you know what? Filling up a 40 channel video hub is not an impossibility. And you might have to get 2 to have all the routing you want. And that still is way more expensive than what one network switch would be, that would give you multiple times more routing capacity than the video hubs would give you, or any video switch would have in there. So anyways, just want to give you a little example there. Also, the products then that NewTek has that today support 4K workflows are the NC1IO, all right, which we just looked at. This will support up to 2 channels of UHD, either input and output if you want to set it up to do one each direction. And the TriCaster TC1 or IP series units can both do a single UHD output. Now, it could be either the 2-rack unit or the 3-rack unit. It doesn't have to be the 3-rack unit like it shows in the picture here. It's just those units support it. To put this in perspective with some other 4K solutions you can get out there, I just want to really show the amount of power that NewTek has put into these products. If you look at the amount of sources and 4K capability, you can see that VMC, the IP series, and even TC1 for that matter, they are dwarfing other solutions that are out there because, like I said, most other solutions, when you go to 4K mode, they go from a 24 input to a 6 input, or they go from a 16 input to a 4 input, whereas TC1 is still a 16 input UHD solution, or VMC is still a 44 input UHD solution. And even some of our other competition out there, they don't do 60 frame rate. They can't do as many, you're not going to get 16 channels of UHD on some of those other solutions because there's just not the bandwidth set up in those systems to deal with it that we have put into our systems. And you can even see that, compared to even our previous TriCaster 8000 and 460, which admittedly are not even UHD capable systems at all, you could see that even compared to those, we're giving you multiple times the amount of performance and bandwidth in these new platforms than what we've had before. So these are really taking you to the whole next level of performance and capabilities in these products from what you might be used to previously. All right, so let's just take a quick look at how 4K is set up in these systems, and then if there's any other questions, we will try to answer those. So I'm gonna go back into my IP series system, and the first thing is I'm just gonna exit out here really quick and show you how you set up a 4K session to begin with. So I'm at the start screen here, and when you go to make a new session, you can see in the panel in here that I can choose a variety of video formats. Now, one thing also to be aware of if you're not is that both TC1 and IP series are both multi-standard out of the box. So NTSC and PAL frame rates are both supported on any system. And then we do have some major presets. These are kind of what we consider probably the most common presets that customers would want. So, HD or 3G or 4K, you can just select it, but all the formats are available on the side. So if the major format's not what you want, I need to work 720, I can select it. I need to do 1080p or UHD at 60p, I could select it as well. So anyways, I pick the format I want in there, and I'm just going to use the session I used this morning, which is this one here, which is a UHD 60 frame rate session. And I'm going to start this up. And now what is happening is that the 4 SDI outputs on the back of my IP series or TriCaster unit are now reconfigured to operate as a single UHD 4K output. All right, so it's just started up in here. And if we look at our output settings in here, you can see that there is now one mix output. It's available both as NDI and as SDI, all right? And I could choose what goes out. But I do want to make this point that on the output side, there is one output. There is no secondary output or something like that. Now, if I need to output 4K and let's say also output maybe 1080 simultaneously, I could use a NC1IO to take that 4K signal and turn it into a 1080p signal. So it's not impossible with our boxes to do that. But again, on the TriCaster or IP series itself, it is that one output that is going to be in that format coming out of the back of the unit. Otherwise, everything else is exactly the same as what you would be used to. I still have the same number of inputs, same number of DDRs, same number of MEs. So all those features that on virtually every other video switcher you can get on the market, that when you go to 4K becomes 1/4 of what it would be. If it was 4 MEs, it becomes 1. If it was 16 inputs, it becomes 4. We don't lose any of that. We get to keep all that functionality just as you had it and continue to work with it. So that's how it shows up on the TriCaster side. And then if we go to the input module side, so here's my NC1IO. So again, this output is already set up. I'm bringing in my mix out, and I'm outputting it as quad link. So that's actually coming out 4 of the SDI connectors. But let's say I want to bring in the 4K SDI that's coming off my IP series in there. All right, so I got to quickly do one thing. I got to switch a couple inputs around here. So let's... All right, so you can actually see right now at the bottom, notice how my four SDI inputs, each one of them is 1/4 of the image, because right now each SDI, if I do this the right way, is outputting 1 quadrant of there. Now, I'm just showing this so you can kind of see behind the scenes that's what's working in there. But the reality, what I would do is I would set this up for, let's do quad in, quad out, and set up the first input to be quad link, right? I'm going to bring in all, not output, input. I'm going to bring in quad link, all right? So this is going to take all 4 of those SDI inputs, numbers 1 through 4, and turn them into a single 4K imagery. So this upper window, right, the top window, is my HD camera coming into my TriCaster as HD, being output as UHD 60 frame rate on the 4 SDI lines, and then I'm routing that into this NC1IO, and the upper input is the SDI signal coming in that way, and the lower input is actually the NDI signal coming in that way, being converted back into SDI out if I needed to. So this actually shows a 4K in and a 4K out. I know you see the same image in both, but that's just the way I've got it set up right now. So I'm bringing in 4K and spitting out 4K from this one unit at the same time with how it's configured right now. So that is how 4K in these products work, and what you'd be looking for to hook in 4K stuff. At this point, if there's any other questions, please, you can either chat them, and I'll try to answer them if they haven't been answered already by somebody else. I see a lot of them have already been answered by some of my coworkers on there, and we'll give you a few more minutes to ask any questions and stuff that maybe hasn't been covered. And otherwise, I want to thank you for joining me. And I hope this was useful and you got a lot of information out of it. And I will just say to finish off that we are planning on trying to do another one of these. I'm not sure when exactly, but at some point in the hopefully near future, where I'm going to demonstrate how to do and set up the warp demo. And if you're not familiar with the warp demo is what you literally were just watching right now. All of this ability for me to zoom in on different parts of the interface and switch between different systems based on whatever I need it to be in there. This is all part of a setup that we built here at New Tech called Warp, that allows me to push out different parts of the screen. I can also go split screen in here and show you 2 things side by side in here. So all of this is being controlled by this Warp demo, and it's a web application we've actually built. So it's a little touch screen, and you can just tap what you need, and it just does exactly what you want, and makes it really easy to do these remote presentations. So that's going to be kind of the next thing. We're going to show you what you need to make this work, and how you set it up, and how you do this, and then you would be able to deliver demos like this to your clients. So look forward to that coming. I don't know, hopefully in the near future. As soon as we know, we will send out the information. So I'm going to go over and look at what other questions people maybe have asked that haven't been answered yet.